For the past several days, I have listened to the craziness about the alleged Russian interference with our elections, which I find fascinating considering the fact that the United States, through the CIA, the NSA, and others, have interfered with 50 or 60 or 100 elections and violent overthrows of governments throughout the world. And to claim that the Russians interfered with our election is, to put it bluntly, sheer craziness. So let me put a little perspective on this. The claim is that the Russians spent $1.25 million per month on alleged interference by September of 16, and they employed hundreds of individuals for its online operation. So it was an online operation, okay? They spent, and they also employed this internet research agency, paid 4,200 people for Clinton staffers and 880 for Trump staffers. So they were playing little games. And of course the claim is by the mainstream media is that this $1.2 million buys a lot, because the average person only earns $10,000 in Russia as opposed to 3 or 4 times that much here. So let's put this in perspective. Let's assume that we're talking 4 months when it might have had any impact at all, which is an overstatement. That's a total of $5 million spent. And it is not all on one side. So let's put that in perspective with relationship to our national expenditures on the election. This year in the national election, Hillary Clinton and groups supporting Hillary Clinton spent $640 million, and Donald Trump spent a little over $302 million. So there's $1 billion spent directly on the elections. That doesn't count free media, which would have been at least equivalent to that on mainstream media and debates and the rest of that kind of thing. There's another couple $1 billion in mainstream media equivalent of election involvement, engagement, proactive stuff. And that doesn't count the outside spending by super PACs, which in 2016 was, the total raised by super PACs in 2016 was almost $1.8 billion. That's B with a billion. $1.8 billion. They allegedly only spent somewhere between $1.1 billion and $1.4 billion on the election. And remember now that half of this expenditure, or this amount raised, could have been from 150 families who were attempting to interfere and intervene in the election itself, thanks to the Supreme Court and Citizens United. So we've got all kinds of folks that are playing little games with our election, and we're going to talk about a $5 million remote involvement on online operations, when we have billions of dollars being spent here by all kinds of people, including super PACs that are not regulated and that are not limited. So the super PACs include outfits like Priorities USA Action, which spent almost $200 million on Hillary Clinton. There was one, let's see, the biggest one that supports Trump, one of them is $25 million that supported Trump, another one $22 million that supported Trump, and it goes on from there. So let's put the rest of this in perspective, which is to say that Rod Rosenstein said there's no direct information that this $5 million or $4 million or remote online stuff influenced the election. And let's see what it would have taken to make a difference in our election. So there are 4 states that had less than a 1% difference in the total alleged voting on presidential election: Michigan, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And in order for it to have had an impact, we have to have more than the number of people that voted that would have seen the stuff within that state that would all have flipped, right? So if 100% of the people flipped because of Russian interference, Michigan would have taken 11,000, New Hampshire would have taken 3,000 to go from Clinton to Trump. Pennsylvania would have taken 45,000 and Wisconsin would have taken 23,000. Florida would have taken 113,000 people. These are people that that are on one side that would have had to flip. Now you can argue, well, gee, it only took half that many plus one to flip it over, but you have to say that with billions of dollars being spent on our election, with billions in equivalent mainstream media coverage, free media being spent on our election, to have had $3 or $4 or $5 million worth of crazy online Russian stuff be considered at all an impact in our election is absolute nutcase stuff. And when you put it in the bigger perspective, which is I've discussed earlier, that there were probably somewhere between 3 and 7 million votes, 7 million votes that were flipped as a result of illegals and manipulation, digital manipulation, a total of perhaps 11 or 12 million votes total, and that the likely voting, when you take out the illegal stuff, the digital game playing with our electoral stuff on those digital states, on those electronic voting states, when you take that out, the thought that the Russians had more influence than the fraud and mishandling and illegal stuff and illegal aliens that have voted in our elections is absolute nonsense. And yet we spend all the time talking about it as though the Russians have colluded in our election, which is so crazy that it defies rational conversation. It defies rational conversation, and yet it's the biggest piece of what we're doing right now. That, and of course the gun shooting, the craziness of the whole false flag gun stuff. So let's put this in perspective. It is impossible that even with targeting, that the Russians influenced one state to have changed its electoral vote. One state. And it is impossible, given the amount of money that was spent, that they were any more than a drop in the entire ocean. We're talking about a cupful in a swimming pool, okay? And it just is, well, all right, I've said it, it's crazy. And we need to get on to another page. And the Russian influence on this thing is just, why do we do this? Well, we do it because it distracts people and it gets them all charged up, and they think they're talking about something important, when if they look at it in any kind of rational way, they say, well, gee, it couldn't possibly have impacted. Mathematically, it could not possibly have impacted this election. There is no theoretical potential that it could have. So let's move on to the next page. I know most of you who may be watching this already agree with me, but it's good to have the ammunition which says, how could it possibly have worked? And if it could not have worked, why could it not have worked? And I hope this little video lends some credence to those kinds of considerations. Thank you so much for watching. If you like it, give a thumbs up. If you have comments or input, please feel free to leave your message. And thank you so much for all your support. It's really wonderful. Thanks.